Hey guys, what's going on? It's about 11 o'clock at night right now. We're going to go ahead and do part two of the woodworking talks about the Bible. Working on the name here. But my wife and I were sitting inside a couple minutes ago, and she looked at me and goes, "Babe, do you have any regrets from this life?" And after a few minutes of thinking about it, I realized, yeah, I do. Uh, to my surprise, honestly, I didn't think I would have. But the one that came to mind is realizing that there are people in this life that I've called friends, people that I know are not walking with the Lord that I didn't spread the gospel with. Um, and that's just kind of sad to me. Um, you realize, start looking at statistics that over 7 years, on the average adult loses 50% of their friends, and every 10 years, you lose on average 90% of your friends, which I think is crazy, but it makes sense. Think about all the people in life that you used to know that you no longer talk to, just as it kind of goes on. Um, and in Romans 1:16, Paul says that he is not ashamed of the gospel, right? Because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. So then why should we be ashamed to spread the gospel, especially to people that we call friends, Um, more than likely, 10 years from now, you're not going to be talking to these people anyway, really, if you think about it, according to the statistics. So, I mean, what are you scared of? What are you scared that it's going to be an awkward conversation, and they're going to say you're some sort of religious fanatic, and oh, look at him, all he talks about is church, all he talks about is Christ. We can't invite him out. We got to act different around him or something like that. Who cares? Who cares, really? Um, don't be ashamed of salvation, guys. Imagine you get to heaven and you sit down and you start talking to Paul, right? And he brings up the time that he was stoned, or the multiple times that he was thrown in prison, still writing letters. He brings up being killed by Rome, or one of the 4 times that he was shipwrecked. And then he looks at you and he says, "So why didn't you share the gospel?" I mean, what are you going to say to that? Well, what's the answer? Um, you're going to say, "Well, Paul, that's a good question. I didn't want it to be an awkward conversation. I didn't want people to think that I was weird, and I didn't want to run off friends. You know, I get it. I get it. And I've also thought this, and I've heard other people say it too, that, well, it was a different time back then. It was a different time. It's not the same now. And that's nothing but an excuse. To be honest, it's not. It's not a real reason at all. And I understand that there are some people that you don't want to run off, that you don't want to lose. Lifelong friends that they've never walked with Christ, or maybe they've walked away from Christ, and you don't want to have that awkward conversation. But think about this, Proverbs 27:17, right? As iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. And the process of sharpening iron is not a gentle or a subtle one. No, it takes some grating. It takes some breaking off. It takes some flaking of that metal away as it grinds together. It is not a frictionless process by any means. Learning how to share the gospel with those that you call brother, or those that you call sister or friend, is something that you shouldn't even have to think about, right? This should be effortless. This should be something that is just constant. Something that you're constantly talking about Christ. You're constantly, when people look at you, they shouldn't see you. They should see the Lord, right? When they look at you, they shouldn't be like, oh well, I look at my buddy, Caleb over there, and there's not a whole lot about him that reminds me of the Lord. What a shameful thing. What a shameful thing, truly. You know, Sometimes growing pains build the strongest bonds and the strongest relationships. Uh, it's not uncommon, for your very good friends to have arguments here and there, or think about your wife. Anybody that says that they don't argue in their relationship with their wife, they're full of it. They're full of crap. Let's be honest here. Um, and a lot of times, 99% of the time, you come out through that better than you went in, right? Um, the biggest regret that I could possibly imagine is getting to heaven and looking down and seeing somebody in hell. And before you say, "Oh, well, you'd never see that," let's think about Abraham and Lazarus. You go to Luke 16:23. They're sitting there having this conversation, and there's a rich man that Lazarus had known during his life, quite literally burning in hell, that they can see from there. And I couldn't imagine looking down and seeing a friend and knowing that not by myself and by my own power, but that God could have used me to save them, you know. And again, another one I've heard is, "Oh well, there's other people. Somebody else can mention it to them. There's pastors for a reason." There's people that have dedicated their whole life. Who am I to speak that? And the reality is that faith without works is dead, right? If we go to James, he says that. Take the time today, guys. Take the time to talk to your friends. You never know when it's going to be the last day, last minute that you're going to have with them. You know, it might be the last time you see them. You never know. That could be that. You know. And again, a lot of these people, if you're just embarrassed, like, oh, I'm going to lose them, you're not going to be talking to them in 10 years anyway, more than likely. No matter what you think, there's very few friends, and it says 90%. And I fully believe it. So anyway, that's just a little bit for you guys to think on this evening. You guys have a good night.